We're drilling down here today with Great Bear Resources. Great Bear trades on the Venture Exchange under the symbol GBR. I've got Chris Taylor, the president and CEO. Hey, Chris, I appreciate you spending some time with me. As we close out 2017, before I kind of get into the whole year here and what's coming up, I'd like to get a status update on the flagship property, the Dixie Lake property up in Red Lake.
Okay, well, just to give you a rough update of what's going on now, we're closing a private placement for $1 million. We're headed back into Dixie Lake to drill again in, about 3 or 4 weeks from right now. And we know from when we did the work before, we're looking at about $200 a meter drill cost. It's very cheap to work there because it's right on the road and, it's all year-round road access on the project. So when we did our 1,000-meter program before, that cost us I think it was slightly under $200,000 because it was summertime, so the drill costs were coming in below $200 a meter. So we're saying right now we're going to go back in and drill about 3,000 meters on Dixie Lake, and we expect to hit there what will be some really interesting events for the market in particular, because we found in some of the historical records the same type of high-grade gold mineralization that we already hit in the main area of drilling, but now we've got it about 2 kilometers away along this big regional structure that crosses the project. So we're going to go in, hit it there as well. It'll show some of the size potential on the system. And then when the previous workers were there before, they drilled some very high-grade gold mineralization, some multiple-ounce material that was in the hinge of this fold that's in the region where we did most of our drilling. And we avoided that when we went in and we drilled the first time because we didn't want to just go in and cherry-pick what we anticipated would be the best gold results. But now when we go back in, we haven't tested that yet. It has some interesting features geologically that we want to test, and obviously we want to see what the mineralization is like there as well. So we'll be drilling that too. And when we were reviewing the data, it looks like the area that we've been drilling, the main target, it looks like effectively it's been folded right over on itself. And what that means is the kind of gold that we hit before, like we had a highlight intercept in there, which is quite shallow really. It's only about 100 meters from surface vertically, but it was about 10.4 meters of 16.8 grams gold, if I recall correctly. I'm pretty sure I do. And that one, that zone, it looks like it folds right back around. So what we're looking at is putting some holes into areas where there was some historical drilling, but not very much. And it actually looks like it has the potential to sort of double the size of the system that way too. So it's very exciting for us because we get to go back in, we get to show our investors more of the same high-grade gold that we had before, but we also get to show them the scope of the system, which is really quite large. And I don't know if you keyed into some of the news that we put out about a month and a half ago. But we did a high-resolution geophysical survey over our project, and what we see is this big regionally significant gold-bearing structure, and the area that we've been drilling, it's part of that structure. So that goes across our claims for about 20 kilometers, so about 10 miles, and what we see on that thing is the same geophysical signature that we get in the area where we have gold mineralization, but over this long strike length. So you can see where you get gold, you get these areas where the magnetic signature changes quite rapidly from place to place, and that ties in very well to where it's been drilled already. And there's other zones that we're seeing along that structure. Now, I don't think the entire structure is going to be gold-bearing, but I think what we're going to see is there's going to be several areas along it where you're going to get mineralization, much like what we've drilled already at Dixie Lake. So that's a really nice story to be able to build on because, not only do we have what looks to be a robust and very continuously mineralized system in the area where we've already drilled it, but now we can show that it has real size potential as well. So, really it's an exciting time for us as geologists and as, the management in Great Bear. It's not often you get to start generating fresh drill results in the middle of the winter, but sort of thing you can do on a project like Dixie Lake.
Certainly some great progress you got there. As you kind of walk through 2017, when you're reminiscing here, what warrants an attaboy for Great Bear? What'd you do that you really kind of impressed yourself on this year?
Well, specific to Great Bear, I mean, to be quite frank, when we took on the Dixie Lake project, it had been worked on by a number of people over the years, and we knew that it could be a really good project, but only if it met certain criteria. Like when we took on the data initially, we had some questions about whether the gold was going to be continuous on it, whether whether it was continuous to depth, whether it was continuous along strike. There were some really good hits on it, but they hadn't been followed up properly. So the drill program that we did first, the first 8 holes, it showed us that we were actually right. Like our geological acumen, I don't know how you want to say it, but our geological interpretations were actually bang on. So the attaboy for us is that we managed to pick up a great project back in 2015 when the market was in absolute doldrums. The first time in 30 odd years that anybody's owned the project 100% and bought out all the royalties on it. So we bought out Newmont on the project. They had a 33% interest. We bought out the royalties that were on it from the underlying vendor, consolidated a much bigger land position over this big regional structure. So the attaboy for Great Bear is really just having the foresight to go into an area that had a lot of smoke and really start finding where there is some really nice looking fire, if we use a cheesy metaphor system here.
Well, coming up for 18, looks like raise some money, do some drilling. What's going to determine the targets there that you're going to be drilling on?
Well, like I said, we've got 30 years of data from the project. There's over, I think in total there's about 160 drill holes on it, various zones, right? So about half of those are in one area that's seen the densest drilling, where we did all of our original drilling. But there's holes that have hit gold across. I'm looking at a map; it's in front of me now. Across about 2.5 kilometers. So we have a broad area along this main structure where we know there have been gold hits, and that's where we've got to go in. We've got to show that we've got the gold in that broader area, and then we've got to go follow up on where the high-grade gold is concentrating in the system, and fortunately that seems to be in several places. Also, with that big regional structure that goes through, when we got the geophysics back, it was pretty obvious to us that there's parallels off the main structure as well, and there's already been drilling in those. So out of the 160-odd holes that have been put into the project so far, about half of them are not in that one area. Half of them are hitting within parallels to that zone, and other areas where you see similar mineralization. So, I don't yet know what the total number of gold zones on the project is going to be. That's something that's going to require more work. But there's half a dozen that have gold in drill core already. So as we go through and develop the project over 2018, some of those are going to start getting meat on the bones as well. So we'll start adding to them. But really, like the drill targets that we're going to focus on in the upcoming program, it's going to be more high-grade mineralization in the same areas that we drilled before to show the continuity and size of those. We're going to be targeting that hinge zone. There's where the system folds back on itself, and that's where they got the highest grade gold historically. We want to see where that goes, how much of it there is, what the grade really is. There was some issues with the past work where they didn't assay everything to the full level. So once they got up to like a 26.6 gram grade, they had a cutoff grade at that level, and they didn't report what came back higher consistently. So we have some assays from, for instance, that hinge zone where he ended up with gold that was about 120 grams per ton that came back. So it was several ounces, right? And that's the kind of stuff we want to see how much of that there is in that area. So when we go back in and we drill it, we'll definitely do the full assays on the intervals and see what they actually return. And then we're going to go back in and we'll drill along that folded over repetition of the zone, because that could show by itself. If that ties together like we think it could, you're going to end up with conceptually maybe doubling what you're looking at there. So that's an idea that we're really eager to test. So if you went to our website and you looked at our corporate presentation, we've got those ideas outlined pretty clearly. So everything that I've talked about there, the larger strike extent over 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers that we will have drilled across, then you're going to get that high-grade mineralization in the area we drilled before, the high-grade hinge zone that we haven't touched yet, and the folded-over repetition of the zone that we haven't touched yet either. So it's kind of 4 things to look for with the next phase of drilling, and that's starting again in January.
Oh, you mentioned some targets there. Tell me a little more about West Madsen.
Yeah, it's a early stage project. We haven't done any drill work there yet, but we did send crews in and we did a little bit of prospecting. And what you have at Madsen, I think they're up to about, Madsen's the project controlled by Pure Gold that's immediately adjacent to us. So obviously there's a lot of information published on that online. So we took all the geological information and we noticed that all the main geology projects to the west. So what we did is we picked up the land right to the west of Madsen, and I think they have about a 2 million ounce resource at about 9 grams on average right now at Pure Gold. I'd have to check the numbers, but I think that's about correct. So it's a high grade gold resource. They've had past development there, and they're drilling extensively. Like they did over, I believe it was over 75,000 meters of drilling, possibly more than 80,000 meters of drilling during 2017. So a hell of a lot of drilling going on. They've just recently released a resource update, so you can go to Pure Gold and you can look at that. But the geology continues right on to our West Madsen block. So when we sent the prospectors out there in the summer, they saw some of those geological features crossing our project as well. And what's really, the key thing about Red Lake, and you've got to keep this in mind. Like the background level of gold across the district, it's like next to nothing. Like you're either in the zone and you've got grade, you've got anomalous gold, then you get the high grade gold, or really the background rocks are not inherently gold bearing, so they're pretty much dead. So when you have anything at all, like you look for 50 ppb levels of gold. Like this is like 0.05 grams per ton gold. It's very low grade stuff. Well, that's considered highly anomalous. And then you start looking in those areas when you're getting like this 50 ppb range, and then you get excited. So we did some prospecting at West Madsen, and we're getting over a gram in grab samples, or in the gram range on some of the early prospecting that we've done. That means that we definitely have the gold controlling mechanisms crossing the project. So that's something that we're going to follow up on as well. So when we took the project on, it looked like a good bet on the geology side, because it's adjacent to such a good deposit that Pure Gold has at West Madsen. But now we've just started doing the early stage work, and we're seeing that we indeed do have gold on the project. So that's something that we're going to follow up on. We also did some research on historical data, and there was some gold drilling. I think it was back in the 1950s, and it hit some I'd have to pull the numbers to figure out what they were. I can't recall off the top of my head, but there was gold in drill core on the project that was drilled at this point about over 7 years ago. So we know it's there from the prospecting. There's some evidence from historical work, what little has been recorded, that it's there as well. And that's the kind of thing when we extend what we see geologically from Madsen, we're excited to get back in there and prospect while we're doing further work at Dixie Lake as well.
Well, for investors, a lot of companies out there, a lot of noise. What makes the Great Bear opportunity compelling to investors and separates you from your peers?
Well, pretty much uniquely in this area, we've taken the pains to do probably 3 years now of largely under the hood type work with Great Bear, and that's been buying out 100% interest in the projects that we have, putting together a large land position. Like it's over 10,000 hectares in Red Lake, which is really big compared to most of the other players in the region, and we have no royalties on anything. So ultimately, like whatever's found here, it maximizes the benefit that goes to shareholders, and that's really important because we've been really careful to keep a tight structure in the company. So even after we close this financing that we're doing right now, we're going to have like only about 17 million shares issued and outstanding on the company, and that's really important because structure in this business can be everything. So we've been careful about who we've brought in. Everybody is either closely affiliated with the company at this point, or strategic additions that we know are also going to help us get the word out around the company going through 2018. So it's very tightly held. It's got a very good structure, and the projects are completely owned without any overhangs at all. So really that's quite unique, and it's one of the best gold districts in the world, really. I mean, there's been, I think the number that I've seen 2014 written down. There's over 28 million ounces of gold produced in Red Lake at a 15 gram per ton average grade. So, that's a hell of a lot of historic gold production, which is still going on today, and that shows you we're definitely in the right area to have the sort of 100% owned assets that we do. So anyway, that's what I would draw investors' attention to. Very tightly held structure, very good projects, and complete ownership of them as well.
Well, you certainly got some things going on over there. I appreciate you spending some time. That was Chris Taylor, President and CEO of Great Bear Resources. Great Bear trades on the venture under the symbol GBR. Chris, thanks again for taking the time.
Excellent. Thanks for the time, and I hope we talk again soon.